The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer delivers his first in-person speech as leader to his party's annual conference. Sir Keir used the occasion to praise the NHS, attack the government for failing to plan for the lorry driver shortage and to outline his vision for the future of the Labour Party.
I say these simple but powerful words. We will never, under my leadership, go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government.
Sir Keir, who's still on his feet, said Labour was the party to address the big questions posed by climate change, the pandemic and Brexit. We'll bring you all the latest from Brighton. Also this lunchtime. Sarah Everard was falsely arrested and abducted by the former police officer who murdered her in March, the Old Bailey has heard. The government says its reserve tanker fleet, driven by civilians, will be on the road this afternoon to try to boost deliveries of fuel to petrol stations across Britain. Fresh tensions between Britain and France over post-Brexit fishing rights as Jersey rejects 75 licence applications by French boats. And a royal premiere for the new Bond film, with Daniel Craig on his last outing as 007.
In the sport, later in the hour on the BBC News channel, happy and healthy Andy Murray gets another win on tour, but faces a tough opponent next in San Diego.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer praised the NHS and attacked the government over lorry driver shortages in his first face-to-face speech to the party's conference in Brighton. He said the country faced major issues such as the climate crisis, emerging from the pandemic and Britain's relationship with Europe, issues which needed a responsible leader with clear values. But after a sometimes fractious conference, he faced some hecklers within the hall as he outlined his personal vision for the future of the Labour Party. Our deputy political editor Vicky Young was watching.
It's all about winning, says the Labour leader, but his party is out of practice. Sir Keir Starmer, strolling beside the sea with his wife, has been in the job for 18 months, but a pandemic has edged him out of the political scene until now. This week, internal divisions have made the headlines, with clashes between the leadership and the left over party rules, nationalisation and the minimum wage. But with an ongoing fuel crisis, this was Keir Starmer's chance to turn his fire on Boris Johnson.
Doesn't that just tell you everything you need to know about this government? Ignoring the problem, blaming someone else, then coming up with a half-baked solution.
He said it was his job to understand voters who'd rejected Labour in huge numbers at the last election.
To the voters that thought we were unpatriotic or irresponsible, or that we looked down on them, I say these simple but powerful words. We will never, under my leadership, go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government.
And that was the only glancing reference to his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. But not everyone was happy with his message.
Shouting slogans or changing lives conference.
Part of Sir Keir's aim today was to tell the public more about his own story. His father was a toolmaker, his mother a nurse, who suffered from a debilitating form of arthritis. He recalled visiting her in hospital.
I could sense the urgency in the conversations of the 4 nurses on my mum's bed. I knew, without being told, they were keeping her alive. So when I think of the extraordinary dedication of doctors and nurses working to keep people alive as the COVID virus took hold, I know what that looks like. Let this conference ring out its approval to the NHS staff, truly the very best of us.
Labour has pledged to borrow £28 billion to make the economy greener and fund more police and longer school days. Sir Keir promised a huge recruitment drive to get thousands more teachers into schools and a cut in waiting times for mental health services.
Labour will guarantee that support will be available in less than a month.
And Sir Keir didn't hold back in his criticism of the Prime Minister.
I don't think Boris Johnson is a bad man. I think he's a trivial man. I think he's a showman. He's a showman with nothing left to show. He's a trickster who's performed his one trick. Once he'd said the words, "Get Brexit done," his plan ran out. There is no plan.
The Labour leader hasn't had many opportunities to set out his vision for Britain. He needs this one to count in the hall and beyond. Vicky Young, BBC News.
Let's speak to our political correspondent Chris Mason, who's in Brighton for us. Chris, what stood out in that speech?
Afternoon to you, Rita. This feels like the moment that Sir Keir Starmer attempts to come of age as the Labour Party leader. He's been in post for 18 months, but much of that time entombed at home by the pandemic, as we have all been. But that's particularly debilitating for a leader of the opposition, because all opposition leaders can do is talk and try and connect with the electorate. And he's not been able to do that because of the pandemic and because, as Vicky reflected on, being squeezed out of the news by the dominating national conversation of COVID. Today, he tries to break out of that. And I think the confrontations we've seen, the repeated confrontations on the conference hall floor over the last hour with hecklers, he and his team will be pleased with. Pleased because he can visibly define himself against the party that he took over from and the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Yes, there were some scripted responses to those hecklers. They weren't off the cuff. He was anticipating that those moments would come. But conscious that they will dominate the television and radio bulletins and the online clips from this speech, he'll hope that people have noticed that Labour is under new management, that he can be a transformative leader as far as how the party is perceived. But, and it's a big but, the big question is, can he do it in one parliamentary term? Can he turn round a Labour performance, which was the worst in nearly a century in 2019, into one where he can win at the next election? Or does he merely hand on to someone who hopes that they can win?
Chris, Sir Keir is still on his feet, so we'll come back to you before the end of the programme. But for the time being, thank you very much. Chris Mason there. The Old Bailey has heard distressing details of the abduction of Sarah Everard at the sentencing hearing of Wayne Couzens, who pleaded guilty to her murder in July. The former Metropolitan Police officer abducted the 33-year-old as she walked home from a friend's house in South London in March. Helena Wilkinson has been following the hearing and joins us now. Helena, some shocking details revealed.
Yes, and Rita, it's difficult to imagine what Sarah Everard's parents are feeling. They are sat in Court 10 listening to the most horrific details about what Couzens did to their daughter. He was a serving Metropolitan Police officer. He had a duty to protect the public from harm, but on that night in March, he betrayed Sarah Everard's trust by deception, and he took advantage of his position. They were complete strangers, and the prosecution today in court said that whilst it was impossible to summarise what Couzens did to Miss Everard, if it had to be done in just 5 words, those words would be deception, kidnap, rape, strangulation and fire. Now, Couzens was off duty at the time. He was wearing a belt with handcuffs on when he approached Sarah Everard, who had been on her way back from a friend's house. He detained her, he showed her his warrant card and falsely arrested her. And the court heard that Couzens earlier in the year had been aware of the COVID restrictions and was aware of the language that had to be used. He will be sentenced at the end of this 2-day hearing.
Helena, thank you. Helena Wilkinson reporting. The Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has said that a reserve fleet of fuel tankers, which the government has access to, will this afternoon begin assisting with deliveries of fuel to forecourts. The trucks, which are to be driven by civilians, will provide support to the fuel industry. Earlier, Mr Kwarteng denied that there is a crisis in fuel supplies, although he did say the last few days have been difficult after long queues outside many petrol stations. Our business correspondent Ramzan Kamali reports.
Since last Friday, many drivers have either faced massive queues or empty filling stations. but for some councils it's having a real impact on key services. In Buckinghamshire, getting children to school has been disrupted.
There was a failure by one of our contractors to actually obtain the fuel supplies they'd been promised. That affected something like 300 pupils, many of whom were already on their way to bus stops. So we quickly alerted schools to this and took some action to try and make sure the children stay safe.
The government has resisted calls from Labour to give key workers priority at the pumps and insists pressure is starting to ease at forecourts.
I think the situation clearly is stabilising. If we look at the inflows, the deliveries of petrol, they were matched yesterday by the sales. So that means that the situation is stabilising. I think people are behaving quite responsibly, actually. I think people should buy petrol as normal.
Despite this, he later tweeted that a reserve fleet of tankers driven by civilians will begin assisting with deliveries of fuel to forecourts this afternoon. Additionally, the government has approved the training of army personnel to use fuel company tankers to take place over the next 3 days. This means they could be making deliveries to petrol stations by the end of the week. But some in the industry are sceptical about the impact that this could have.
I think it does create a kind of level of fear that doesn't help. But in reality, they're not really going to do much. I mean, 150 drivers being made available. It's not, we have 8,500 petrol stations in the UK. They're not really going to make much of a dent in this.
The shortage of lorry drivers over recent months has caused problems for a wide range of industries, from supermarkets to fast food chains. There's a real concern in the run-up to Christmas, supply chains will come under immense pressure. The government has issued 5,000 temporary visas for haulage drivers, but many in the sector aren't convinced it will make much of a difference.
We're already moving into the 13-week period that is due to end on Christmas Eve. I question whether or not it's even a practical reality. I can't see that really making a big dent, no.
There are areas that are seeing a return to normality. Looking at current internet searches, the hunt for fuel looks more pronounced in the southeast of England and the Midlands. And indeed, the Petrol Retailers Association are hopeful that the crisis could be coming to an end by this weekend. Ramzan Karmali, BBC News.
I'm joined now by our business editor, Simon Jack. Simon, this reserve fleet is different from the army support that we were expecting.
Yeah, the army is mobilising to come into use at the end of this week. This is 80 trucks, tankers, which are in Cambridgeshire and West Yorkshire, which is there available for industry to draw on in times of need. I think they're going to be using in the low 10s, maybe 10 to 25, something like that number, and the industry has requested them. Now, it takes about 4 of these tankers to fill up one petrol station, so it's not going to make an enormous amount of difference. But the government is spinning this as a positive development, because what they're saying is this means that some firms have managed to mobilise additional drivers but don't have the right vehicles for them to drive. Listen, lots of firms don't have enough drivers and this won't make any difference to them. But those who have, for example, cancelled leave, rejig shift patterns, managed to get drivers mobilised, don't have the right vehicles to transport fuel, they can call upon this reserve. And as the government said here, every little helps. But as I say, very different from the army, which has more vehicles available. They're going through their training routine at the moment to get mobilised by the end of the week.
Many thanks. Simon Jack there, our business editor. The celebrity Katie Price has been charged with driving whilst disqualified and without insurance following a crash yesterday near her Sussex home. She was treated by paramedics and taken to hospital, but she wasn't badly injured. She's due to appear at Crawley Remand Court later. Our correspondent Colin Patterson is there for us. And Colin, just remind us of what more we know.
Katie Price has been famous for almost a quarter of a century now, first as a glamour model, then as a reality TV star. She branched out into fashion. Earlier this month, she was nominated at the National TV Awards for a documentary about her disabled son, Harvey. She arrived here in Crawley at around 9:30 this morning because she has been charged for driving without insurance and also driving whilst disqualified. Now, yesterday at around 6:20 in the morning, her car was found on a road near Partridge Green. That's near a house in Horsham in West Sussex. A police photo showed it turned over on its side and almost blocking the road. Her family released a statement later in the day saying that they had been worried about her about her well-being, and also that they were worried that their worst dreams could have come true, the worst nightmares. Now, what has happened is that she is in custody in the building behind us and will appear in court this afternoon.
Many thanks, Colin. Rule changes to make it easier to research and develop gene-edited food crops have been announced by the government. Scientists believe they'll be able to develop foods that are more nutritious and productive and more resilient to climate change. Gene editing, unlike genetic modification, doesn't involve introducing DNA from different species, but some campaigners say that more regulation is needed. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh has more.
It looks like any other tomato, but it's been genetically edited so it produces more vitamin C. Under the current regulations set by the European Union, it's hard, if not impossible, to develop commercially in the UK. But the government wants to change the rules and have simple gene-edited plants regulated in the same way as new varieties produced by traditional breeding methods.
If the government can deliver on it, it's superb news, I think. Gene-edited crops have potentially so much to offer in terms of agricultural sustainability and healthy foods. Of course, nobody is arguing that they should not be regulated for safety and environmental compatibility. That goes without saying, but I think there's a very strong argument that they should be regulated in exactly the same way as crops produced by more conventional means.
Campaigners protested against genetically modified crops in the 1990s when they were first being tested out in fields. Gene-edited crops such as this wheat have fewer genetic changes than genetically modified ones. And the technology can be used to produce new varieties that could have been developed using traditional crossbreeding, but much more quickly.
GM crops are GM crops, whether they're gene edited or use older genetic modification techniques. I think people still want to see really good safety assessments for both human health and the environment. They want these products to be traceable and labelled so they have a choice and that the products can be recalled if anything goes wrong.
Gene-edited farm animals could be next. These pigs have had a gene removed that prevents them from getting a common form of lung disease. Today's announcement could mark the start of a new generation of genetically produced crops and animals. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
French politicians have reacted angrily to dozens of their trawlers being denied the right to fish off the UK and Jersey coasts. It's the latest episode in an ongoing row about post-Brexit fishing rights. In May, the UK sent 2 Royal Navy vessels to Jersey as French fishermen staged a protest outside the port of St Helier. Our Europe correspondent Jessica Parker is in Brussels for us. Jessica, what are the latest developments?
Well, as you say, this is all about post-Brexit fishing rights, and the UK and Jersey governments have, between them, granted licences to around 250 EU vessels to their inshore waters. But it's emerged overnight that just over 100 have also been denied access. That has prompted huge anger in some quarters. The regional leader in Brittany in northwestern France has said it's unacceptable. There have even been calls for the EU to retaliate. What the UK and Jersey are saying is that they've worked this all out within the rules of the Brexit trade agreement, that it's fair and square, but that they are open to further discussions on this issue. There is a bit of suspicion behind the scenes here in Brussels that Britain's playing politics with the timing of this announcement, perhaps designed to distract from recent bad headlines back home, but UK government sources absolutely deny that. In terms of what the European Commission are saying today is they want to see the full methodology for how this has all been worked out. So this is a development in the post-Brexit fishing rights row, certainly not the end of it.
Jess, many thanks. Time is coming up to 1:20, our top story this lunchtime. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer uses his conference speech to praise the NHS and attack the government for failing to plan for the lorry driver shortage. And still to come, former Olympic long jump champion Greg Rutherford talks to the BBC after he's named in one of the GB bobsleigh squads trying to qualify for the 2022 Winter Games.
Coming up in the sport in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News Channel, the England all-rounder Moeen Ali tells us why he's quit Test cricket, but why he's still got plenty left to offer in the shorter forms of the game.
Now, it's one of the most biodiverse and threatened habitats in the country, the Humble Pond. There are thought to be around 500,000 ponds in Great Britain, plus around 3 million garden ponds. But that's a fraction of the number that were around a century ago. Now, the Wildlife Trust is encouraging people to create their own garden ponds to boost biodiversity. Our climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, has more.
Actually, the water's really clear, isn't it?
We are on a nighttime safari. Wow. To one of the most biodiverse and threatened habitats in the UK.
I mean, lots of insects. Look at that.
We are visiting one of the country's ponds.
That's so good. I've never seen a toad on a torching before.
Ponds are home to an extraordinary range of plants and animals, but it is estimated that 90% of the country's lowland ponds were lost in the 20th century. That is more than 500,000 ponds gone. These Ice Age ponds are quite exceptional, but all ponds are havens for wildlife, say the Wildlife Trust. So I have decided to do my bit.
So the plan is just to put a small pond in this corner of the garden.
Putting in a pond, however small, is the biggest single thing you can do to boost biodiversity in your garden, the Wildlife Trust says. Even a small pool in a bowl on a windowsill makes a difference. I've planted mine with some native British pond plants I bought online.
Right, so this, you just put in the water and it should...
Now we just wait and see what creatures turn up.
Within 2 weeks, mosquito larvae and loads of them. But apparently these are bird mozzies. They don't bite people. Try telling my wife that, though. Then came these beauties, rat-tailed maggots. They look fearsome, but they'll become hoverflies, I promise. We were visited by damselflies, and then these.
OK, there's 4 now, there's 4. One plopped in and fell down there.
Right, so, Catherine, this is my pond. Are you going to have a little dip?
It's fantastic. Yes, I am.
In early September, I invited an expert from the London Wildlife Trust round to take a look.
What you have done here is you've created your own ecosystem. So this is where your plants, your animals, your landscape and your climate will all interact together. And what it will do is create a real bubble of life. So it's like your local neighbourhood of wildlife.
She says ponds can be an important bulwark against global warming.
As our climate changes, we are starting to lose our biodiversity. So what we really need to do is work together to create places that wildlife can thrive. So if we can do things like installing a wildlife pond in our garden, you know, this is one of the best ways to bring biodiversity, provide a home for wildlife and help us make the steps that we need to make to tackle climate change.
So get out your spade and get digging.
Justin Rowlatt, BBC News.
The first black woman to become a head teacher in Wales has been honoured with a monument in Cardiff. As a child, Betty Campbell was told her dream of becoming a head teacher would be impossible to achieve, and she battled to prove that wrong. She rose to prominence in the 1970s by championing multicultural education and putting black culture on the curriculum at her school. Mark Hutchings reports.
3, 2, 1, go!
It's been a long time coming. An unveiling delayed by the pandemic, a process delayed by centuries of inaction in failing to honour female pioneers. Betty Campbell was used to being first. From her upbringing in Cardiff's Butte Town, she was in the first female intake at Teachers Training College, something she was told in school to forget about.
I was in a class of 36 girls, and I went out to the headmistress and told her that I wanted to be a teacher. And she said, "Oh, get the idea out of your head right away. You'd have insurmountable problems." And even at that tender age of 15, I knew that she meant, if you're black, that's your lot. You're not going to get any very far in teaching. And I sat down and cried, and that's the first time I think I've ever cried in my life over a colour problem. I wonder if it is Chantal.
She became Wales's first black head teacher at Cardiff's Mount Stewart Primary, where she taught for 3 decades, ensuring children learned about racism and setting their own ambitions. a lesson for her pupils and family.
Everybody just feels this amazing sense of pride within them, and I'm just so honoured that I kind of got to be here today, got to share the day, got to just, hear stories about Nan and got to share a few of our own as well.
Untroubled by the controversy about old colonial statues, the public representation of Welsh women has been anonymous, a cast list of unnamed characters.
It's sort of a bit of a bittersweet, really, to be honest. Yeah, I do get a buzz. It's amazing that it's actually happening. But the sad side is that it didn't happen many years ago, but the good thing is that it's happening now.
A determined campaigner, Betty Campbell, had been told as a young girl to know her place. Today, that place is here, celebrated in her home city in a truly landmark event. Mark Hutchings, BBC News, Cardiff.
The former Olympic long jump champion Greg Rutherford has been named in one of the Great Britain bobsleigh teams that will try to qualify for the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing. The 34-year-old, who started training in the bobsleigh in April, is hoping to be the first Briton to win a medal at both the Summer and Winter Olympics. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks reports.
From Olympic gold in the long jump,
and it's big,
to a leap into the unknown. Greg Rutherford's dream of becoming the first British athlete to win a summer and winter Olympic medal is on.
It wasn't that long ago, 2014, that Great Britain managed to win a medal in the Olympic bobsleigh. So I think that we have a great opportunity to do that again. So I'm very excited about it. I can't wait to actually get sliding with the guys. And I think it's going to be, as I say, a really special winter.
This isn't the first time he's turned his hand to something different. His pace and power apparently make him the perfect partner for the sport. The story of Jamaica's famous bobsleigh team in the 80s was turned into a movie.
Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme, get on up, it's bobsled time.
Now Greg wants his own Hollywood ending.
We effectively self-fund or find sponsorship for the sled. So it is a bit of a Cool Running story, really. It's the British version of Cool Runnings, and hopefully it doesn't end with a crash and actually ends with us standing on a podium. That's most certainly what we'd prefer.
With a shiny new sled, there's just the small matter of getting it down an ice track for the first time. These next 7 weeks till qualifying will no doubt be the ride of Rutherford's life. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
Daniel Craig's fifth and final James Bond film, No Time to Die, has finally had its premiere, following several delays caused by COVID-19. Movie bosses are hoping the film, which is out tomorrow, will help to revive the cinema industry in the wake of the pandemic. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba was there.
Not one, but two generations of the royal family, bringing a double dose of glamour to the new 007 film. Royalty, together with the cast and crew of one of the crown jewels of British cinema, for a very special world premiere.
Definitely, it's a mixture of feelings. It's like I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done and the movies we've made and what we've achieved, and of course it's tinged with some sadness, but it's time to move on.
Shall we cut to the chase?
He says he hopes he's leaving the franchise in a positive place, with the series evolving, particularly with its female characters.
Also thanks to Daniel, because he's a feminist, and it's really something that he brought, to the franchise, and it was time to have like strong female characters who are not only strong but also vulnerable and just consistent, and for that I'm really happy. Yeah.
Let's get more now on our top story, Sir Keir Starmer's leader's speech to the Labour conference. Let's go back to our political correspondent, Chris Mason. Chris, what else have we learned?
Rita, Sir Keir Starmer approaching his peroration now. He's into the last couple of paragraphs of his speech, receiving repeated standing ovations from the audience after several moments of heckling from those on the left of the party, not comfortable with the direction of travel that Keir Starmer is taking the party in. Since we last spoke 15 minutes or so ago, a chunk on the economy and in particular on climate change, a promise for what he calls a Green New Deal under a Labour government to front-load the cuts in emissions that are needed if the country is to hit net zero by 2050, and another Clean Air Act, as he describes it. This has been a very personal speech from Sir Keir Starmer as he tries, after 18 months locked up during the pandemic, to introduce himself to the country.
Chris Mason, many thanks. Time now for the weather, and after many months of talking to her remotely, here is Susan Powell back in the studio.
Thank you, Rita. Let's hope I've remembered how all the levers and switches work. Let's go. It's a gorgeous day out there today. There's plenty of sunshine. There was some heavy rain last night, but many of us are now enjoying autumn skies like these. But there is some cloud in the picture as well, and through the afternoon there will be showers for some of us. Best way to pick those up, looking at our satellite picture. Flying in, there's the band of cloud that brought last night's heavy rain. The white cloud you can see in little chains here are the lines of showers just feeding in on the northwesterly wind that will continue this afternoon for western Scotland, for Northern Ireland, some getting into the northwest of England, some across North Wales, down into the Midlands and eventually across into East Anglia. But a lot of sunshine on the whole, but cooler than we've been used to. Temperatures in the mid-teens at best. Quite a difference to the picture last week despite all of the sunshine. The chilliest conditions will be through this evening. Overnight, we see a weather front coming in from the west. It kicks up the wind, a southerly wind, and actually temperatures will rise for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland by the end of the night into double figures. To the east, still on the chillier side, perhaps a little bit of early frost in some of the Scottish glens. And then for Thursday, well, not very much in the way of sunshine around in contrast to today, thanks to this big area of low pressure pushing a weather front across. We will, I think, see things brightening from the west come the afternoon for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but with that low pressure centre towards the north, it's just going to continue throwing some showers into the mix. So I think there will be some rain for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland as the afternoon goes on. And then this weather front kind of hangs back across England and Wales, so it keeps quite a lot of cloud in place and some outbreaks of rain. Temperatures average for the time of year, 15, 16 as highs. And once we get back into that low pressure regime, that is where it looks like we will stay now for the next 3, 4, 5 days. A big area of low pressure to the north, but spawning little areas of low pressure within it. That complicates the detail of our forecast somewhat, but certainly for Friday, we are pretty clear there will be some rain around. It looks like it'll clear the southeast through the first half of the day, leaving some sunshine for England and Wales. But Scotland and Northern Ireland will always remain on the windier side with quite a few showers in the mixture. And temperatures, again, sitting in the mid-teens at best. Then we get to the weekend. Oh yes, low pressure still with us, but like a big old dartboard across the UK. Still some smaller features running around in there. I think of the 2 days, Saturday the wettest and windiest, Sunday still blustery, but hopefully we'll see a bit more in the way of autumn sunshine. We made it 2.5 minutes. Back to you, Rita.
Well done, Susan. Welcome back. Thank you. A reminder now of our top story. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has delivered his first in-person conference speech, pledging a new Green Deal for the nation. Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.